nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram itam shri radhikanatha padasarojayo yena premanubhutya dattam tam shri gurum bhaje Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupan Anyabhilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payora Shomurake Dato Bande Bhagavatani Mananudavam Murdnani Patyakshito Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvishe Nama Nama Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupari Kripa Krite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupo Bhutanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvas Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Adanastrinam Dantoir Yacheham Puna Puna Srimadrupa Parambojo Dhulisyam Janma Janmani Abhirapali Patiputra Kanta Dasya Bilashati Balashvavara Shirupa Chinta Mali Sapti Sangsto Matsvanta Durdhanta Hai Churastam Raganugami Bhajano Dasamanasanam Shiradhaya Sahasada Smaratam Brajandhum Shri Rupa Pada Kamala Shrita Cheta Samme Chittam Satam Nirupari Madhukari Atupada Padme So Bhaktir ya nikilarta varga janani ya brahma sakshat kriter anandati shaya prada vishaya jat sukyat vimuktir yaya Shri Radha Ramana param bhuja yugam yasya mahanashrayo ya karya vrajaloka vad gurutara tasyai namah Yaram ya nikilaga varga nikilarta sanga shamani shodratritim sangata Ya swadya rasikai sukabdi janani dhikarya mukti spriham Ya dhyata hridaye vrajendra tanuja premamrita syandini Saji yad hari bhakta vrinda mohita Dhanye Padyavali. By the grace of Sri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar Prema Purushottam, Karuna Mahasagar Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnava charges, the fulfiller of his heart's desire on this earth, Sri Rupa Goswami Pad. Again, today we will continue our discussion of Padyavali. So we'll resume in the section on Bhaktas Niṣṭhā, and we're discussing verse 83. In the previous the previous discussion of this verse, we discussed the point that vimukti has appeared before the author, has appeared in the fore like a goddess begging to be engaged in service. And although this goddess, as if sent by Bhagavan and ready to wait upon the author expressed no interest in vimukti. So we discussed how this phrase vimukti can be understood to refer to sayujya mukti, as may be commonly expected, or as per the analysis of verses in the Sindhu and the Sandarbhas, which we discussed last time, can be understood to refer to any type of mukti. And this is because mat sevāya purna. My bhaktas are fully satisfied by seva to me, and therefore they don't want any form of moksha, much less things of this world. So we discussed this last time, so today we'll conclude the discussion of the verse where the author also expressed no interest in vairājya. So what does vairājya refer to? That we'll discuss, and then we'll conclude the analysis of this particular poem. So probably we're page 6 or 7 in the PDF. I'll just pick up from where the discussion of vimukti ended. So I'm in the middle of a paragraph saying, similarly, extensive sovereignty may pay tribute. Rājyaṁ karotu vairājyam carries the same implication that the author will not accept anything other than service to his Ishta Devata Sri Krishna, because he has no desire for anything apart from that. And since he does not accept even mukti, then he certainly will not accept any sort of high position or power within the realm of samsara. So I've rendered the term vairājya here as, quote, extensive sovereignty. So rājya being reign over an area, so vairājya being an extended or a grand reign. But what does that refer to? The commentator interprets, quote, extensive sovereignty, vairājyam, to refer to rule over satyaloka, meaning the highest post of rule that generally one can achieve within the realm of samsara. So extensive sovereignty would mean that, rule not over only the earth or only svarga, but extensively over all of the lokas. So that thus implying achieving the position of Brahma. So this is how the commentator interprets it, and that's possible, but I don't find any direct precedent for that term being used to refer to that object. But if we look in the Bhagavatam commentaries, all of our favorite commentators use this word in a different sense. So that may also be applicable here. So I'm demonstrating that. Sri Samipad, as well as Sri Sanatanpad, Sri Jivapad, and Sri Chakravartipad following him, all alternately interpret the term vairājyam to refer to possession of siddhis beginning with minuteness, meaning these well-known class of 8 siddhis, being small, being big, being heavy, being light, etc. In the context of the mention of the term extensive sovereignty in a statement of Sri Krishna's 16,000 queens to Draupadi, which itself is also a significant verse on the same topic of the discussion of the verse. So this verse is all about nishkamata, or not desiring anything other than seva to Bhagavan, and this verse of the queens, where they speak of vairājyam as something they don't want, is said in a statement also about not wanting anything other than Krishna and service. So whether the author was inspired by this verse in the Bhagavatam as he wrote his poem or not, perhaps not, but it happens to parallel quite well. So I've included this statement of the queens, which is as follows. So they're speaking to Draupadi, O Sadhvi, neither universal sovereignty over the earth, nor sovereignty over svarga, nor the enjoyment of these forms of sovereignty nor extensive sovereignty, vairājyam, which is our word for discussion, nor the dominion of Brahma. So here they speak of the dominion of Brahma as something other than vairājya, but the commentator interpreted vairājya as referring to the dominion of Brahma. So evidently, it means something else. Nor the unlimited, that is the unlimited bliss experienced in realization of Brahman. Nor even the abode of Hari, that is salokya, samipya, sharshti, or sarupya mukti. Means we don't want any form of mukti, we don't want any sort of position over any realm or reign in samsara. So what do we desire? We desire none of these, and instead desire to bear atop our heads his, the club bearers, meaning Sri Krishna's, blessed foot dust. And you might say, well, the queens, they're there with Krishna all the time. They don't have this foot dust. They've got access. Why are they praying to get the foot dust if they already have it? So they want a particular variety of foot dust, which is as follows: Sri Krishna's blessed foot dust enriched with the fragrance of kumkum from the bosom of Shri, meaning of Sri Radha, as per our commentators, since the ladies of Braja, the Pulinda women, the grass and creepers of Braja, and the cowherds there tending the cows, all long for the touch of the feet of he of most exalted disposition. That is, they too all long for the touch of Krishna's feet. So they want the touch of Krishna's feet in Braja. So this is a statement where they're expressing adoration for Krishna's lila in Braja with the Brajabasis and especially the gopis. So they want to say that they want that foot dust means that they cherish that as a most wonderful opportunity to serve Krishna, which is to say they want to serve Krishna in the way that's most pleasing to him as can be. So they want service and not any of these other things, which is precisely what our poet is saying in the verse we're discussing now. So the intent of the author in saying that he does not desire, quote, extensive sovereignty, is thus to say that even if all the metanormal powers or siddhis that could be attained throughout the realm of samsara approached him and offered themselves to him in a manner similar to that in which a king of a small region offers himself and his kingdom as a tribute to a reigning emperor, still the author would not accept them, because he harbors no desire for anything apart from service to his Ishta Devata, Sri Krishna. So especially in the, earlier centuries in the era of this type of writing, the idea of a Maharaj seated on his throne with great important persons coming into his court and showing great respect to him, falling at his feet, paying him tributes. This was considered an image of the greatest attainable power, influence, and success, if you will, on earth, in earthly life, or the greatest instance of wealth and power being visibly, tangibly expressed and exchanged and so forth. So the author is as if saying, yeah, even if I was sitting on that throne, even if I was there, and not only if the kings of this earth were falling at my feet and paying tributes to me as if I were an emperor, but even beyond that, even if the siddhis all came and bowed to me like a bunch of kings to an emperor does, or even if goddesses, even if moksha came to me like a goddess and offered herself to me, still I would not accept. So this is taking, an image that's very central to the classical monarchy image of reign and society within ancient India, and then using that platform, if you will, to express this niṣṭhā, or express this one-pointedness of desire for Krishna, for desire for Krishna. So this is it may sound simple, but the image that it evokes is a very powerful image, which is speaking sharply to the audience that the author was writing for, to say, think about what you want, reflect on what you could have, even if you were in the position of being someone who could receive whatever they want, what would you really actually desire, and what would you accept even if you didn't desire it but it was offered to you? Think very carefully. The idea being, as we say simply in English, be careful what you wish for. So this is what determines your ultimate trajectory and your multi-lifetime journey. So desire only bhakti, desire only Krishna, desire the Krishna of Braja, and your destiny will be supremely auspicious. This is the suggested implication of the verse. So Sri Rupapad stresses this essential characteristic of pure and superlative bhakti, that is, non-desirousness of anything apart from bhakti, in his seminal definition thereof at the outset of his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. In the famous verse, Anyabilashita shunyam jnana karma dhyanabritam anukulyena krishnanushilanam bhaktir uttama. Continuous action for or related to Krishna, possessed of favorability, that is, here the key part that we're discussing now, free from desirousness of anything else, and unobstructed by jnana, karma, and so forth, is superlative or uttama bhakti. Sri Jivapad comments in this regard that, quote, free from desirousness of anything else, anyabilashita shunyam, means possessed of desire only for bhakti. And Sri Chakravarti Pad explains this phrase to mean free from desire for any result otherwise, that is, apart from bhakti. So what the poet has written in our verse of discussion is a precise way of expressing in an active sense, or from a first-person perspective, this essential characteristic of Uttama Bhakti. Sri Rupapad also later here in Padyavali dedicates a section specifically to the subject of Bhakta's non-desirousness of moksha. The implication again being that when Bhaktas do not desire even moksha, it is implied 84 teyorai that they desire nothing of the realm of samsara. So that's what we have on this verse 83. So verse 84 is of similar nature. Next, the compiler cites a verse wherein a bhakta expresses their own fixity personally to Sri Bhagavan. kṣauṇī-patitvam athavaikam akiñcanatvaṁ nityaṁ dadāsi bahumānam athāpamānam vaikuṇṭha-vāsam athavā narake nivāsaṁ Vāsudeva mama nāsti gatis tvad-anyā. You may continuously grant me rulership over the earth, or utter poverty, great honor or dishonor, residence in Vaikuṇṭha or residence in naraka. Ha Vāsudeva, I have no aim other than you. So these are very strong words, very fearless, bold words. It's easy to say, oh, I don't want anything, I just want you. But to say it pointedly, that means I'm ready for utter poverty, utter humiliation, even going to hell. That I'm ready for, but I won't pursue anything other than you. This is, anyone can pronounce this statement, but whose devotion, whose Niṣṭhā is so strong that they could embark upon a test as to whether this is true, and keep a smile on their face as they undergo dishonor, poverty, hellish conditions. That, is whoever can pass that test, koti koti pranam to their feet. And, whatever our individual lives, however they may unfold, or whatever difficulties we may encounter, if we can bear this spirit of this verse in mind, then it can also give us a source of strength in facing adversities that we may undergo, and in terms of sustaining our clarity of focus, and also giving a sense of meaning to even what difficulties we may be put through. So, there's a similar statement in the Bhagavatam, which we'll look at. The author says, "I have no aim other than you," because he has no object of worship other than Sri Krishna. The one-pointedness, or akantita, of the author's fixity that is shown, that's a typo, in this verse, is akin to that described by Bhagavan Shiva to Parvati in Srimad Bhagavatam. Quote, "All who are devoted to Narayan do not become afraid under any circumstances. They are seers of the same object amid svarga, liberation, and naraka." So this is stated in this well-known instance in which Chitraketu has arrived at an assembly of Bhagavan Shiva and sages with Parvati sitting on his lap, and Chitraketu has made a remark that it doesn't look so good to have Parvati seated on your lap in front of these sages while you're discussing dharma and other matters. So Shiva understood what Chitraketu meant, and Chitraketu didn't mean to speak critically or imply a fault on Shiva's part, but Parvati took exception to what he said and cursed him, and when he received this curse, then he accepted it without being disturbed or without appearing to object. So this was shocking to Parvati, that she'd cursed someone and that the person was fine with it, wasn't disturbed, wasn't sad. And so Shiva then explained to Parvati why Chitraketu reacted the way that he did, because all who are devoted to Narayan do not become afraid under any circumstances, even when they get cursed by Parvati to undergo hellish life. They are seekers of the same object, seers of the same object amid svarga, liberation, and even naraka. Sri Sanatana Pad comments in this regard, all who are devoted to Narayan do not undergo fear under any circumstances, that is, on account of anything at all, meaning from the presence of devas and others, or curses and the like, since they are those whose disposition is to see the same object, that is, aim, even in svarga and so forth, that they also do not want anything else at all besides the object they are one pointed upon, is the purport. So this is a nice observation of Sanatana Goswami, that to say that they only see one object, how is it that they only see one object? What it means is that they don't want anything else, because your desires are really what color how you see things, and they also determine what you're really looking at, so to speak. So when you only want Bhagavan, then when you only want bhakti, then you're not, so to speak, looking so closely at your immediate environment. Am I on earth? Am I in Svarga? Am I in some hellish place? They're all not the aim. So in that sense, there's an equivalence to them all. So when someone's only aim, when someone's only desire is Bhagavan, then they remain fixed on that. They remain attuned, attentive to that, whatever their circumstance or their environment may be. And should it change, it doesn't change what is fundamental to their outlook or to their inner experience. So this is the sense Jiva Goswami also has some nice points on this verse. I've collected them as follows. The purity of bhaktas is established by indifference to other happiness and suffering. That is, happiness and suffering unrelated to Sri Bhagavan and bhakti to him. This is stated in Narayana Para Sarve. So this is a very nice further illumination of the import of this verse. What is a definition of purity? Purity is indifference to happiness and suffering that is unrelated to, or that doesn't specifically relate to, bhakti to Bhagavan. So this means that what makes a bhakta happy is bhakti, what makes a bhakta sad is aparad, or a lack of bhakti. And if they encounter conventional causes of happiness and sadness, like, affluence or poverty or fame or infamy or what have you, then here it says indifference to other happiness and suffering, that they're not fazed by these things, that they're not excessively concerned or detached or attached or disturbed by these things. This shows the purity of the bhakta, because when you're attached, then when you get it, some rise comes, so to speak, and when you're attached and you lose it, then some deflation occurs. But if you're not attached to something, then it may come, it may go, there isn't much change. So that detachment, or that indifference to these other things, is indicative of the absence of their desire for other things. Therefore, that indifference is indicative of their purity. So this is a significant point. Next, quote, seers of the same object, tulyartha darshinaha, means they whose disposition is to see, that is, perceive the same one object, that is the purushartha in the form of Narayan, because of their absence of vision of gain and loss elsewhere, that is, in regard to anything else apart from in relation to Sri Narayan. So if they say, I want Bhagavan, as we discussed last time and as we've discussed many times, the principal characteristic of bhava bhakti is tareka sprihatva, desirousness of him alone. I repeat, the principal characteristic of bhava bhakti is desirousness of him alone. So who is he then? He is the purushartha. So that is what Jiva Goswami is saying here, that the purushartha in the form of Narayan, to say that one has desirousness only of him, means that he is the artha, he is the object, he is the thing that the person desires. So Jiva Goswami is reading this statement in that way, that, quote, to see the same object means their disposition is only to look towards the object they seek, to look towards Narayan, to seek Narayan. And that implies then the absence of vision of gain and loss elsewhere. So in other words, if your object is Narayan and someone hands you, rule over the world, you haven't attained your object. So you remain fixed on achieving your goal. So you don't accept, or in the case of Gopakumar, maybe you briefly do if you think it might help, but as soon as you realize that it won't, then you let it go. So, in other words, even if one gains money or loses money or gains fame or loses fame or this or that, one doesn't feel that one is necessarily any closer or further towards their object. But when they acquire something that helps them pursue their object, or that feels like a certain degree of tangible attainment of that object, then they feel progress, then they feel some tangible significance to the thing. So in this way, but when a bhakta has this vision, this view of seeing Narayan as the only goal, then whether they're situated in environment A or environment B or environment C, that doesn't in and of itself equate with the achievement of their goal, and therefore it's all the same to them. And even if they're in a hellish condition, they're not just sitting there getting angry for whoever's the agent inflicting some difficulty upon them, but they're still fixed on their aim and not bothering getting upset about this, that, or whoever's the delivering the consequences of one's own karma, whoever's the postman for that. They're not bothering to get upset about that. And similarly, if they are in Svarga and there's loads of pleasures and what have you to be had, they're not partaking of them, or they're not, becoming dissuaded by them or forgetting about their primary object. They're saying, I want Narayan, I'm focused on that. So their vision doesn't stray, in other words, regardless of where they are. This is another import. And now a third. He states this, that is the negligibility of mukti by means of describing Bhakta's attachment to Bhagavan, which disregards other suddenly befallen great pleasures and sufferings. That is, which causes one to disregard even great pleasures or sufferings unrelated to Bhagavan that may suddenly befall one. Narayana para sarve. So that is how he takes the purport of the verse. Because of the same negligibility of Svarga and so forth. That is, because of Svarga, liberation, and naraka, all being equally negligible in the view of a bhakta, and because of the same Bhagavan being the sole purushartha amid all of them, that is, because Bhagavan alone is a bhakta's only purushartha amid svarga, liberation, and naraka, they, meaning the bhaktas, are seers of equality, meaning the same seers of the same singular object amid svarga, liberation, and naraka, seers of Bhagavan. So I think that's clear. Chakravarti Pad, finally, he adds a little bit on this. They are seers of the same object amid svarga, liberation, and even naraka because of the vision they have of non-distinction between them, meaning between svarga and naraka, etc., based on the non-relishability of all three. So, that these bhaktas perceive in these three domains. So, what they relish is Bhagavan, is bhakti. So, whether it's the pleasures of svarga, or whether it's the pleasures of liberation, or whether it's the suffering of naraka, none of it is the relish of devotion, the joy of devotion. So none of it is directly relishable to them. None of it is their object. So it's all the same. So, as a result of the absence of the joy of bhakti being inherent in any of them. Okay, clear. So, this analysis of this statement in the Bhagavatam, if we look back at the verse under discussion, he says, you may continuously grant me rulership over the earth or utter poverty, great honor or dishonor, residence in vaikuṇṭha or residence in naraka. So you might grant me sufferings, you might grant me pleasures, but I have no other aim other than you, meaning I relish nothing other than bhakti, than the sight of you, the darshan of you, etc. So these things are all the same to me, so you can allot me whatever you think fit. Tatte nukampam susamikshamano bunjana ivatma kritam vipakam. I'll see whatever is allotted to me as your grace upon me. I'll see my karma as your grace. I'll see that what is administered to me is like the administration of a loving father for the well-being of his son. It might be some nice, warm, sweet milk on a winter evening. It might be some bitter neem juice. Whatever it is, it's sweet or bitter, pleasant or unpleasant, I'll see it as your caring arrangement for my well-being, to teach me what it is that I so require to learn at the stage I so find myself. So I'm open to it, whatever it may be, and because I seek nothing other than you. So elaborating on this verse, on that theme, I also have here a verse of Rupa Goswami. So the word gati in the verse under discussion. So the word gati was used, and we've discussed it so far, in the sense of being synonymous with artha, or object, or aim. So the word gati can also be interpreted as a shelter or a refuge. So if we look at it in that way, then it also is similar to the way Rupa Goswami has written a poem speaking of the word gati in the sense of refuge or shelter. So we can examine it from that perspective as well. The word gati in the verse under discussion can also ultimately be understood to mean shelter rather than aim, since Sri Vidyabhushan Pad glosses it this way while commenting on a verse by the compiler that is closely akin to the verse under discussion. So this is also a fairly well-known verse found in the Stavamala. Birachai maidandam dina bando dayam va gatirihana bhavatta kçauṇī-patitvam nāsti nipatatu shatakotir nirmalam va navambhas tadapi kila payodha stuyate chatakena. O friend of the humble, you may allot punishment or grace upon me. Regardless, I have here no shelter or gati other than you whatsoever. A cloud may cast down a thunderbolt or pure fresh water. Still, it is certainly praised by the Chataka. So a nice instance of passive voice, as we were discussing earlier today. So the cloud is praised by the chatak bird in this classical kavya prasiddhi or kavi prasiddhi, that these particular wagtail birds are said to drink water from the clouds and not from rivers or lakes or anything on the earth. So these birds thus represent the idea of one-pointedness and also of patience and enduring a long wait to be favored or blessed with something desired. So, moreover, even while doing that waiting, even while sustaining that one-pointedness, also being willing to receive the opposite of what one so desires. In other words, if one is long waiting for rain, and also singing the praises of the rain cloud, in other words, also giving one's best to that source from which one wishes to receive this favor, and then nevertheless gets the opposite of that, gets some harsh treatment or gets some thunderbolt upon them, then still, even receiving that, the Chatak goes on singing the praises of the cloud, or we can understand it to mean can perceive even that thunderbolt as something benevolent, as per the tat-anyā line of thought that we mentioned a minute ago. So a cloud may cast down a thunderbolt or fresh water. In other words, what's greatly desired or what's greatly troubling. In either case, the Chatak doesn't seek any other shelter than the cloud, and nevertheless perceives the greatness of the cloud, or praises the cloud for its act. So similarly, you may punish me, or you may grace me. What may, and obviously punishment is also a form of grace. So when he says grace here, it means grace in the sense of give me some easily appreciable favor rather than some more difficult to digest favor. If we see, grace and punishment as two sides of one benevolent hand, just as the example that I mentioned a minute ago of Vishwanath Chakravarti from his commentary on the verse Tat-te-nukampam, he said, a father can feed sweetened milk or neem juice to a son. It says he can also, physically discipline him by force, or he can embrace him and smell his head, which is a classical gesture of affection. So there may be, forceful corrective measures. There may be encouragement and affectionate gestures, whatever it may be. You may allot me either. In other words, I'm ready for both. If I need what I need, I just wish for that. I'm confident that you know that. So I seek to receive what you in your wisdom see as fit for me. Chakravartipad also cites a prayer of Prithu Maharaj from the 4th canto in his comment on the Tat-Nukampam verse, which we discussed earlier. I don't recall the Prithu verse, but Maharaj verse, but he said, as a father always does good to his son, whether it be in the form of discipline or affection, then so I wish to receive your favor. So just like that, Rupa Goswami is saying, O friend of the humble. In other words, I who am in this humble position, you are my true well-wisher, you are my true person who cares for me. So what you deem fit and best for me, you may allot me that. I will not reject it. I will not seek shelter elsewhere. I will not doubt that this is actually good for me. And just as the Chatak praises the cloud. So this is the sense. Vidyabhushan Pad has some nice comments on this. Now, even in the case of the author's own feeling of unfitness for being sheltered solely in Krishna, he still states his desire for that. So this is also interesting. In other words, in the previous verses, in the context in the Stavamala, Rupa Goswami also expresses not just desire for Bhagavan's shelter, but even this feeling of being unfit to be given that shelter. In other words, if I'm engaging in disrespectful or sinful activities, why ought I be sheltered when I'm not acting in a way that makes me nice to have around? But despite even that, or feeling myself to not be fit, still he prays for that, because still that's ultimately where he wishes to end up to be. So as a chatak bird has no remover of its thirst, such as a river, other than a cloud, that is, as a chatak bird drinks water only from clouds and nowhere else, so I have no remover of the suffering of samsara, such as Brahma or Shiva, than you. I think I need an other than you. So this is referring to the idea of one-pointedness in upasya, or having only one object of worship, one ultimate object of service. So this is something very pleasing to Krishna, the famous statement in the Gita, Apichet sudarataro bhajatemam ananya bhak. Anya bhak, a worshipper of no other. If you're an ananya bhak, bhak here meaning one who has devotion, so anya, who has bhakta for no other, anya, then apichet sudarataro, even if you're very naughty, even if you're misbehaved and childish or what have you, if at least you're not worshipping anyone else, if at least you have this fundamental quality of being one-pointed in your ultimate relation, then you're sadhu. This is the famous statement of Krishna. So this point is also relevant here by saying that I'm in a state of suffering, I'm in a state of deprivation, I'm in need of shelter, but I'm not seeking that from anyone else. I'm not going here, there, I'm not undecided, I'm not unclear. I'm certain on this bit. So I have no remover of suffering from samsara other than you. That is, so I take shelter in no one other than you, on account of the Shruti, statement in the Shvetashvara Upanishad, quote, only by knowing him does one surpass death, that is, attain moksha. There is no other path to follow. And the Smriti, the statement of the Devas to Muchukunda, may well-being be upon you, today choose a boon from us, apart from kaivalya, meaning liberation from samsara, Verily, the imperishable Bhagavan Vishnu alone is capable of that. So in other words, only by knowing Bhagavan, only by being blessed by Bhagavan, can one ever become freed from the sufferings of the world. So one ought have no other shelter, one ought not seek shelter in anyone but him. Thus, since in this verse the author professes pure sharanagati, that is, one-pointedness upon Bhagavan, and acceptance of Sri Bhagavan's shelter and dispensation in whatever form it may assume, the desire for mukti in the form of removal of suffering, that was expressed by the author in the previous verse of the Stavamala, and that was also expressed in other verses in the Stavamala quoted here in Padyavali, which we discussed earlier, related to those prayers of Prahlad in the 7th canto, is on account of being a cause of the increase of bhakti. That is, the author's prayer for the removal of the fear, that is, the sufferings of samsara, is made with the intent only of seeking the removal of obstacles to bhakti, so that he can absorb himself in bhakti to Bhagavan all the more. So this is a topic we discussed at length, with reference to a few statements in the Krama Sandarbha and the Sarita Darshani on a few of Prahlad Maharaj's prayers, where on the one hand he says, I'm not afraid of anything in samsara, and in a little while earlier he says, I'm afraid, please bless me. So he appears to contradict himself, so the commentators resolved all of that by saying that what he's afraid of is not the world, he's only afraid of obstacles to bhakti, he's only afraid of the association of worldly people, but he's not afraid of the world. In other words, if he has sadhu sangha, if he's absorbed in bhakti, then he's fine to be in the world, he's not afraid of anything. So there's no contradiction, there's no fear of the world, and there's no need then to seek a rescuer from things of the world. Only there's the desire for the shelter of Bhagavan and the concern that one be protected from influences that may draw one away from Bhagavan or away from bhakti. This is the gist. So, thus, in the manner explained by Sri Chakravarti Pad in relation to the verse Tate Nukampam Susamikshamano that was discussed earlier in the commentary on the quality of being tolerant like a tree, in regard to verse 32 here in Padyavali, the author of the verse under discussion professes his fixity in Bhagavan by welcoming whatever circumstances Bhagavan may so deem beneficial for him, with trust in Bhagavan's verily providing apt guardianship for those who take shelter, that's a typo, in him, and unwavering one-pointedness upon Bhagavan, that demonstrates a bhakta's purity in being equally disposed to pleasures and pains, and being desireless of everything apart from Bhagavan and bhakti to him. So how much peace does someone like this feel? If really someone has this type of niṣṭhā, this type of one-pointedness, this type of readiness for heaven or hell or what have you, then really they are peaceful. And there's no other way to be peaceful in the world. Peace will not be in the world. There's no time when there isn't some social, political, environmental turbulence going up and down. So the only way to feel a sense of peace and constancy and shelteredness in this ever-fluctuating world is to take shelter in Bhagavan, is to desire nothing other than Bhagavan. So Bhagavan's shelter, Bhagavan, cherishing Bhagavan as one's all in all, as one's be-all and end-all, as one's whole object, or sarvasva. This is precisely the goal of the path of bhakti, or to reach that state of being is said to be the primary characteristic of bhava bhakti, which is the object of sadhana bhakti. So all of these principles point to the very central spirit of uttama bhakti, and the very central aim of aspirants on that path of sadhakas. So to again remind us of something that we ideally think about every day, is again gladdening to hear. Yes, again, it is good to hear these very same things. Because for those who may be saddled with or beset with numerous samskaras for so many worldly things, then again and again to return the mind to this state of focus, again and again impress upon the mind the beauty, the sublimity of this aim and ideal is all the more relishable the more that one does it. And to contemplate or to hear these statements of poets expressing some of these teachings that we see the Goswamis put in analytical format in terms of exposing the concepts, to see those same concepts expressed in first person using poetic language and interesting imagery is nice. Or in other words, it can bring some spiritedness, some color, and some renewed enthusiasm to the aspiration for these ideals. So hence the Padyavali, hence this section on Niṣṭhā, hence Rupa Goswami preparing this compilation for our benefit. So he's so minutely and beautifully brought out these ideals, and he's collected all this poetry which celebrates them and which depicts them in such a way that we can both cherish them in our hearts with some color and richness, as well as, precisely or sharply contemplate them with our faculty for discernment or vivek. So, as the Goswamis are, precise and pointed and lucid in their discerning analysis, so too are they rich and colorful and what can I say? Like as they praise the majestic gait of the elephant, or another, the swaggering of something very grand, something deeply powerful, but at the same time with this free-flowing, charming style to it at the same time. So to be a follower of the Goswamis is to appreciate both of these elements, to appreciate both the lucid philosophical analysis and the rich, heartening poetry to complement it, or to bring it home, so to speak, and cherish it. So I'm about out of time, but this last verse on this section is very brief, so I might go a few minutes over, but I think I'll just finish this section and finish this last verse so that next reading we can go fresh into the new topic. So, the final section here on Niṣṭhā, which is again on this exact same theme as the last two verses, so I don't have any further elaboration on this subject. Dishatu swarajyam va vitaratu tāpa-trayaṁ vapi sukhitam dukhitam apimam na vimuktiś kṣauṇī-patitvam. He may grant reign over Svarga, or allot the three sufferings. Be I gratified or troubled thereby, may Keshava, my master, never abandon me. So this is the same point expressed in what you might call through vyatirek, or to say that I desire Bhagavan, or that I want Bhagavan, or that I want to be accepted by Bhagavan. Another way of saying that is, may Bhagavan never reject me, or may Bhagavan never abandon me. May, to say that I want this, is to say, may I have this, and to say, may I have this, is also to say, may I never be deprived. So, in one way, that can trigger something else in the heart, or to say it, to convey the same concept even in reverse, can also make it even more poignant, or to contemplate how one's actions, the impact of one's actions in that light, to say, okay, what I'm doing, is it leading to the fulfillment of one's desire to have him? Or another way, would this action lead to me being abandoned? Or would this action be grounds for exclusion? So that can also, in one way, sometimes make our discernment or analysis of things more sharp. So again, I'll read May he grant reign over Svarga, or allot the 3 sufferings. Be I gratified or troubled thereby, may Keshava, my master, never abandon me. This verse further illustrates the purity of Bhaktas in being indifferent towards whatever personal pleasure or suffering they may undergo for the sake of sustaining their fixity in Bhagavan and continuous engagement in bhakti to him for his pleasure. The author's intent is elaborated on by the commentator as follows. Quote, Keshava, my master, may grant me reign over Svarga, that is the chance to receive high honor, possess great power, experience immense sensual pleasures, etc. Or allot me punishment in the form of the 3 types of suffering in samsara. Regardless of whether I am thereby gratified or troubled, may he never abandon me. The purport is that thereby, that is, by his causing me to reign in Svarga or undergo the sufferings of samsara, I feel no misery. In other words, that doesn't really upset me. If I have to undergo some even physical pain, that may not upset me deeply or at my core, in my heart. But I would feel extreme misery if I were abandoned by Keshava, since he is my master. As a virtuous wife who is abandoned by her husband has no other shelter and undergoes severe suffering, so I would feel I have no shelter anywhere and would undergo severe suffering only if I were ever abandoned by Keshava. So, may our thoughts, words, and deeds be such that they never lead to such a sad condition. So I'll conclude here. If anyone has any comments, questions, corrections, or otherwise, please feel free to share. This concludes our discussion of Bhaktas Niṣṭhā. Yes, I see a hand.
Pranam Baba.
Pranam.
I have a question. In the case of one-pointed Bhakta who really truly desires only Bhakti and only Bhagavan, for example, in the situation when this Bhakta, pure Bhakta, is being offered Siddhi, how is he being made aware of this offering? And for example, he refuses, but then he is being told that this Siddhi is needed for service and he must accept them because they are needed for service. How is he being aware, for example, of it? Is he being told directly by Bhagavan that he must, for example, because also like, right, for example, that if he doesn't want the Siddhi, he only wants Bhagavan and Bhakti. But there could be also like a case where the Siddhi might be needed for service to Bhagavan. So how is this happening? Like, how is he, this pure Bhakta, for example, who really truly wants only Bhakti, he doesn't want any Siddhi, but for some reason, Bhagavan wants this Bhakta to have Siddhi, so he would do some service for Bhagavan. How is it happening? Like, is it in the mind of the Bhakta? He is being like showing sphuratu directed by Bhagavan, that does Bhagavan himself like makes him aware of it? Like, how is it like the process? How is he like when he, for example, says like, no, Bhagavan, I really don't want any Siddhi, and how is he made being aware that he must accept them? This is the one part of the question. And another one, for example, when he accepts the Siddhi, like with the purpose of using them only for service to Bhagavan, because he really doesn't want them, how should he use them in such a way so that he wouldn't get polluted by this and remain as pure as he was like in the first place?
Well, I can't think of a Puranic illustration right off the top of my head for Siddhi specifically, But what comes to my mind would be something like Arjuna, who didn't have, we might say, these 8 siddhis in the sense, but he had many of these special weapons that are fired by mantras, and some of which that were obtained by winning certain prizes or by pacifying certain devatas. So in those cases, the Pandavas were guided by Krishna. And when it was understood that these weapons would be required for objectives that Krishna wanted them to fulfill, then they sustained these powers, they made use of all of these weapons. But when there was no more use for them, or when, and to the extent it was understood that it wouldn't be pleasing to Krishna for them to use them, then they did not. For example, after the battle, when they capture Ashvatthama, and Ashvatthama had killed all of the Pandavas' sons, and had fired a Brahmastra at their, Parikshit Maharaj in the womb of Uttara, trying to kill off their future grandson. So, if Arjuna were unprincipled or weren't a bhakta attentive to the wish of Krishna, then if he were an ordinary person, if you met the person who just murdered all of your sons and tried to murder your grandson, many people might not be able to keep their cool. And if they had loads of powerful weapons at their disposal, there's many people who might have difficulty refraining from using them and taking revenge. And not only that, but we hear that when Ashvatthama was captured, then Krishna left the decision of what was to be done to, was it Arjuna or Yudhisthira? I forget, in the 7th chapter of the 1st canto, where on the one hand, he is fit to receive the death penalty for the crimes that he's committed. On the other hand, he's a Brahmin, and it's a sin to kill a Brahmin. So Krishna says, okay, follow the Dharma. In other words, he leaves it to Arjuna to use his vivek, to use his discernment. So, how to manage this? This is what they call a dharma sankat, or an issue where 2 different duties dictated by one's dharma come into conflict with each other. So one then has to understand more deeply when these 2 particular duties are both simultaneously present, which one overrules the other, which one is ultimately more important or more applicable in a given situation. So Arjuna, in this context, he doesn't kill Ashvatthama to abide by the rule that a Brahmin should never be killed, but he strips him of the jewel that he had and strips him of his honor by cutting his hair and so on, which for a warrior and for a proud person and involved in all these things was like more humiliating, or was losing the chance to have a glorious warrior's death on the battlefield, and rather, as it is said in the Gita, that for kshatriyas or persons, although Ashvatthama was a Brahmin, he was very much steeped in the mentality of these kshatriyas and this war and so on, that dishonor was worse than death. So in that sense, he killed him by stripping him of his pride and honor, while at the same time not literally killing him. So in this way, he solved this dharma sankat by contemplating on what duties he had to do, and ultimately on what Krishna would want in this situation. And so Krishna wanted to test him and see how he would react. And so Arjuna was left with this task to deliberate, to think what would be most pleasing to Krishna, what would be a proper way of upholding dharma in this context. and then he took his action using the powers that he had at his disposal. So, in that way, to apply it to the instance of siddhis, the task would work more or less the same. If there were some situation in which bhaktas had siddhis at their disposal, then they would use them in a minute if they knew and had the clarity that this is what Krishna wanted them to do. They would do just as he so wished. So if there was a circumstance such that there was a necessity for to use such powers, then they would do so. Perhaps we could give the example of Hanuman, when, for example, he leapt from Lanka to the Himalaya to bring herbs to revive Lakshman. Leaping with that kind of power is, for the sake of this conversation, is like one type of siddhi, or like one type of exercising a great power. So it's not that he's just jumping around all the time because he likes jumping or he wants to show off that he's strong or something like that. But when there was an acute necessity and an urgency of service, then he immediately exercised this power that he had in order to protect Lakshman. So it may arise from a direct order that would come from Ram in such a case, or it might arise from Krishna just putting one in that situation and then allowing one's own discrimination to reach the decision. And in that case, it can also be understood to come from Krishna, as we hear in this well-known verse, Naivo payan tapatichim kabayas tavesha, where it lastly says, Acharya chaitya vapusha svagatim vyanokti, that Bhagavan himself shows the way to himself in the external form as the Acharya and as the internal form within the mind. So then Chakravartipad glosses this phrase chaitya, or this presence or form of Krishna in the mind, what is sometimes called the Chaitya Guru, and says that essentially that refers to thoughts, or what he calls chitta vrittis, or particular modulations or functionings of the intellective faculty that emerge in the mind, that are inspired by or prompted to emerge there by Krishna. So even that, you can say, if we apply it to the case of Arjuna, or if we take Arjuna to represent a bhakta, when a bhakta exercises their discernment, even that discernment that they reach and the thought and conclusion that they come to can also be seen as the grace of Krishna, or the guidance of Krishna manifesting in the form of those thoughts and in the form of those conclusions to their deliberation. In the Gita, Krishna says, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam, that I give this buddhi yoga, or this means of understanding. If we take the word, if you look at the commentary of Chakravartipad, here he takes yoga in the sense of a means. So buddhi, meaning a particular understanding or a grasp or a discernment of things. So a means of discernment is supplied by Bhagavan to his bhakta to enable that bhakta to come to him, which we can say more broadly means to serve him. So both the Shastra, the teacher of the Shastra, the information, the guidelines, the principles that we receive, these are all grace of Krishna coming to us. And then even the thoughts and the discernment that we have as we contemplate these things, those also come to us by the grace of Krishna. So internally, externally, Krishna showers us with this grace whereby we can come to him, whereby we can know and understand him, and to what extent? To whatever extent he allows. He's known to the extent that he so wishes, to whom he chooses to allow to be himself to be understood to that extent. So in that line of thought, then we can apply that to any and all cases that might come up. So would it then be that a person received siddhis from Krishna or for someone else? Could be either way. If they had them, what would they know what to do with them? Again, could be either way. It could be an instance where they receive some order to use them, or it could simply be that they acquire some knowledge of when they ought to be exercised. An example comes to mind of Kardama Rishi in the Bhagavatam, when he uses his siddhis to make himself look young and provide Devahuti with this celestial airplane and all of this, because it was the order of Brahma upon him that he had to have a son. He wanted to just sit in meditation and had no interest in that, but it was given to him as his duty, so he used the siddhi that he had in order to satisfy Devahuti, who had dutifully accepted him as her husband and had lived an extremely austere life while he engaged in penances and so on. So he used the siddhi to fulfill the duty that he had, and then as soon as she had the son, he walked away and said, okay, I fulfilled my duty, now I'm going off to the forest, and that was it. He went and absorbed himself in devotion thereafter. So perhaps that would be a case of a bhakta using a siddhi to fulfill the duty that he'd received, which he understood to be a service to Bhagavan, and not with any attachment to it. If he had this siddhi to create a magic flying airplane and have Devahuti have 1,000 handmaids around her and all of this, he could have engaged in all sorts of, sensual enjoyment if he so wished, but he never did. He only did that in order to fulfill his duty, and as soon as his duty was done, he was done with it. And again, he's sage in the forest. So that would illustrate how a bhakta can remain detached from the influence that those things could have, because having the power to have that kind of thing could easily, distract a person of lesser purity. So it would depend upon the relative purity of the person as well. But Kardama would be a person of very high and great stature in that respect. So does that answer the question?
Yes, only one little one. Did I understand correctly, for example, that in such a case, if this bhakta is using siddhis with detachment, constantly keeping in mind that this is being done only for service to Bhagavan, and remains like totally detached, he remains unpolluted by these siddhis, by using them, and remains pure, like his purity is preserved in such a way. Is this correct?
Yes, in other words, it's certainly possible for a bhakta to use such things and not be polluted by them if they have sufficient purity. Ambarish was the emperor of the world, but he wasn't polluted by being that. The Pandavas were great royals, but they were worshipped even by sages and paramahamsas. So if one has a very, very high standard of purity, they can remain completely uninfluenced even by wealth, even by power, even by siddhis, or any of these other things. And more broadly speaking, how many bhaktas go to Vaikuṇṭha and get moksha and the power of sarshti mukti, and nevertheless are purely serving Bhagavan even with those things? That itself is the essence of what it means to be a pure bhakta, is even to have all facility for things other than bhakti, not even at one's fingertips, but just think of them and they'll manifest in the mind.
Yeah.
And yet they never use them for any other purpose. But the other side of the coin is if someone is still in the stage of having anartas, and then you hand them a bunch of siddhis and power, then, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and, the person can be dragged down by those things. So it would depend upon the stage of the individual, how the facility would influence them.
Okay.
So generally for those in the non-siddha stage, there's an influence, there's an ethic of minimalism, to use modern language. In other words, you're better off not getting mixed up with having a whole bunch of money or a whole bunch of power or a whole bunch of followers or a whole bunch of anything. You're better off keeping it simple while while the mind is still full of samskaras that, can be activated and can lead one to acting upon and getting oneself absorbed in things other than bhakti. But once the chitta is purified, once the samskara for bhakti is ruling, once the chit shakti is coursing through, so to speak, then, it becomes a very different ball game, if you will.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, well, let's conclude here for tonight. And if we're so blessed, then again in a few days, we'll continue into the next section of Padyavali. Vaishnavibhyo namo namo. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.
Jai Radha.